Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just checking that everybody is joining. We seem to have a fair few joining. We'll probably just give it 30 seconds to a minute to see if any else joins. So we'll just give it a moment. Hello, hello. Got another person joining. Good afternoon. Okay, I think we're going to start. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Jumpsec, thank you for joining us today for our lunchtime live. The session will run approximately for around 45 minutes. Today, I'd like to introduce Matt Lawrence. He's our Director of Cybersecurity Operations. Matt is very modest, but he has decades of experience and insights from the hundreds of insights that he has very calmly worked on, and I'm sure we'll share some more recent IR stories. His talk today, Building Resilience Against Modern Cyber Threats. Matt is going to explain in more detail why it's never more important than now to build cyber resilience. So just to let you know, this talk is being recorded. I hope you've got a cup of tea or a drink, a sandwich, sit back, relax. And without further ado, I will hand over to Matt Lawrence. Matt.
Thank you very much, Donna. And thanks everyone for joining. So let's get straight to it. As Donna just mentioned, today I'm going to distill around 2 decades of responding to incidents all around the globe, and also the combined work and output of Jumpsec's adversary simulation, continuous attack surface management, pen testing, detection and response, and threat intelligence teams. This is thousands of hours of work delivered in around 40 minutes. So I'm aiming to provide you some real actionable insights with also some food for thought on the subject of building resilience. But I also have the aim to continue the conversation from this point forward with you all. And there'll be more on that particular point a little bit later. Assume they'll get in and design for what happens next. This is the message from major UK retailers like Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op during the recent parliamentary hearings on cyber resilience. When we're talking about 300 million plus in losses, the resulting operational outages, and 7-week shutdowns, we're in a mode now where this simply isn't theory anymore. It was the real world cost of attacks, bypassing traditional security and exploiting identity and supply chain trust. The lesson, in my mind, is very clear now, and it is that prevention alone is no longer enough. And companies now need to really embed cybersecurity and resilience to the decision making of the organization, right up to board level. And we're seeing the NCSC reflect this in their communications, even over the last couple of days. I was actually delighted to see yesterday the announcement around the government proceeding to ban things like ransomware payments. I'm not going to cover that particular announcement today from the government. You can go and read it. We've shared some messages on the Jumpsec LinkedIn page about that announcement yesterday. But in my mind, the outcome of announcements like this really point the finger at resilience being an absolute critical component of everything that we're doing across industry. Modern resilience today has to start with a mindset shift. Prevention will always be necessary, but it's no longer sufficient, because even the best defended organizations are getting breached now. And it's not through 0 days, but it's through things like valid credentials, supplier entry points, or quite often, as we see on incidents regularly, human error. And it isn't a question of if anymore, but when. So what we're seeing is leaders in this space are now actively designing for compromise, which means embedding things like detection and response as a core operational capability, not as bolt-ons to the things that you're doing. We've got to think of this like fire alarms and sprinklers in our buildings. You don't assume that a fire will never happen. You prepare to limit the damage. This shift really means that successful security leaders are moving from that mindset of total prevention to one of resilience and continuity. And this involves asking some key questions, such as what happens after the attacker gets in? How do we limit the blast radius of the attack? And can we continue to operate even during a breach that might be incredibly serious? This mindset now informs, or should inform, everything we do, from architecture to comms plans. It means rehearsing your IR team's response, regularly simulating breach scenarios, and embedding cyber response into wider crisis management. The goal here is simple, even if the execution isn't. When the attackers break through, their impact needs to be contained, controlled, and it can't cripple the business anymore. I touched on this very briefly, but just to bring focus to it, identity is now your perimeter. Attackers are bypassing technical controls by targeting people and processes. They're phishing users and intercepting MFA codes. They're exploiting help desks to reset credentials. They're hijacking user sessions using a technique known as adversary in the middle. And we're seeing groups like Scattered Spider who have perfected these tactics, calling the support desks, tricking staff, and gaining high-level access without malware. M&S was breached this way, and so was the co-op. So resilience has to start here. It's got to start by enforcing things like phishing-resistant MFA. It's got to, we've got to start monitoring for abnormal login behavior. We've got to implement stronger checks for account recovery processes. We need to treat identity misuse as a likely breach, not an edge case. Every attempt to steal a user identity now is a potential breach and a resulting ransomware attack in the most likely scenario that most organizations will face today. So considering this, I've referred to the co-op and the M&S breach already, and I've discussed Scattered Spider. And I'm sure everybody's been reading an awful lot about this group. Scattered Spider isn't a myth, but I think the way many people think about them might be. So let's just take a moment to separate myth from reality when it comes to this group. They're often being portrayed as sophisticated, tightly run cybercrime syndicate, but the truth is, it's a loosely affiliated collective, mostly young English-speaking individuals, some even teenagers, often based in the UK or US. And this, by the way, has been confirmed by both the BBC and the UK's National Crime Agency, who've been investigating them in connection with the recent high-profile retail attacks. We at Jumpsec describe Scattered Spider as a financially motivated criminal collective. And the key thing that we need to understand here is that their tactics persist even if individual members are arrested, which has happened recently. And this is because their methods are repeatable and widely known. And this is a much bigger problem than just Scattered Spider, of course. This group is first focusing on identity. Social engineering is their entry point. And this does include calling those IT help desks to request password resets, launching phishing and smishing campaigns, using SIM swaps and performing MFA fatigue attacks to gain access. They're becoming adept at adversary in the middle phishing using tools like Evil Jinx. They proxy login pages to capture session tokens and allow full access, even bypassing MFA. And they're also, once in, they're then targeting identity providers like Okta or Microsoft Entra. And in some cases, they're even there's even registering attacker-controlled identity providers and federating them to the target's SSO, essentially allowing them to impersonate any user. And then they're also exfiltrating data from SaaS apps using legitimate APIs. We're talking Dropbox, Salesforce, Zendesk. And they've even deployed ransomware directly on VMware ESXi servers to essentially sidestep endpoint security. So with all that in mind, what's the takeaway from this? Well, these are not advanced malware authors or advanced attackers, really. In many ways, they're getting away with murder. They're agile, persistent social engineers, and who really, at a basic level, understand human and identity weakness better than most defenders. So defeating them and groups like this isn't about buying more tools. It's about fixing the processes that they exploit. And this means things as simple as hardening help desk procedures, implementing proper phishing defenses, and actively monitoring the identity infrastructure. And there'll be more on those topics in a moment. A really key concept that's really important with resilience is that you can't defend what you can't see. It's as simple as that. The amount of incidents that I've got into over the past 20 years, where there is next to no visibility, is quite frankly shocking. And it's around, it's beyond the point now where we have to fix this as an industry. Every organization needs to be prioritizing visibility at many levels, because in today's hybrid cloud-first world, most organizations have many critical blind spots. We're talking shadow IT, unmanaged cloud services, dormant accounts, unnecessary supply integrations. And in fact, our own research from conversations with dozens of organizations revealed that less than 20% thereabouts of companies have visibility of 95% plus of their assets. And that's a big problem, because attackers are exploiting what you've forgotten. They're scanning the internet, they're finding unpatched assets, they're finding those test servers you don't know are live, and then they're walking straight in. Fixing this isn't glamorous at all, but it's essential. We need to be focusing and automating asset discovery across cloud, on-prem, and your third parties. Your attack surface, your external attack surface has to be continuously monitored in today's threat landscape. And we need to reconcile gaps between IT and those security asset inventories. Visibility is foundational to resilience, because you can't protect, detect, or recover what you don't know you have. So if there's one takeaway from today that I think is that everyone needs to take home and think about a bit more, it's this one: you can't defend what you can't see. Just as a side note now, because I've mentioned it a few times already, and I'm acutely aware in cybersecurity, we fall into this habit of referring to things as if everyone knows what we're talking about. And adversary in the middle phishing is one of those things that is cropping up regularly. And it's because it's increasingly used by groups like Scattered Spider to bypass MFA. And it's something that my detection response team are dealing with persistently across all of the organizations that we monitor. With adversary in the middle, what we're looking at here is, instead of just stealing credentials, these attacks essentially place what we'd refer to as a transparent proxy between the user and the real login page. So that lets attackers capture not only usernames and passwords, but also the session tokens, giving them full access without needing to authenticate. From their transparent proxy, they literally download the tokens and cookies as files and import them into their browser, their attacker browser, just normal web browser, like the likes of which us normal people are using, and boom, they log in like a normal user, like you see every day. You come in, you refresh your browser, and you can still access all of the SaaS apps and things that you do on a day-to-day basis. That's what attackers are leveraging. That convenience is enabling them to gain persistent access and steal identities. A big problem here is that these modern adversary in the middle kits are evolving. They use platforms like Cloudflare workers to hide behind trusted domains. They use techniques to bypass sandboxing. Sandboxing being a means that historically the security industry has used to determine if something is bad or not. Well, these attacks are bypassing those controls. They're also doing things like stripping out identifying elements from URLs and headers to evade detection, again, bypassing traditional defensive mechanisms that have been there for years now, walking straight past those. And they're also doing things like obfuscating the page layout of their adversary in the middle login pages to break things like visual fingerprinting and HTML matching. The results are these phishing kits are evading email filters, URL block lists, and even advanced computer vision tools. And so defending against them now means going far beyond traditional email security towards things like real-time session monitoring, much stronger controls around identity provider trust relationships, and so on. So then in the face of these things, you might be thinking, well, okay, that's not good. They can bypass MFA. I'll just use, phishing resistant MFA. How about FIDO2 tokens? I've even mentioned phishing resistant MFA a little bit earlier. Well, so you invest a ton in FIDO tokens, and the attackers figure out a way to bypass that. They're now adopting multi-factor authentication downgrade attacks. So let's talk a moment about what this really illustrates here, because this is talking to received wisdom and clear industry advice. Deploy those phishing resistant MFA, FIDO2 or passkey tokens. It's considered the gold standard, but as I've just mentioned, the attackers evolved. So we're seeing these adversary in the middle kits that just don't bypass the weak MFA. They actively detect when phishing resistant options are available, and then use techniques to downgrade the login flow to a phishable alternative, like push notifications, SMS, and things like that. So what that means is even when organizations are trying to do the right thing and deploying secure tech, the outcome still depends on how well it's configured and enforced. So really, this is a perfect example of why true cybersecurity resilience is multifaceted. It's not just about deploying good controls. It's about things like disabling fallback methods that can be exploited, locking down configurations to prevent things like flow manipulation, and monitoring session behavior and token usage after login. And also, crucially, understanding the attacker's perspective, because attackers are lazy and they will always take the path of least resistance. So resilience then means assuming controls will be tested and then building defensibility into your whole identity flow, not just the top layer now. But there's also another problem here, because we could consider something like an MFA downgrade attack to be quite, to be reasonably sophisticated. Well, I've mentioned this a few times already as well. They don't have to go that far even. The old ways are sometimes the best for the attackers. So if we can combine that with help desk exploitation, where attackers call the help desk, impersonate a user, sometimes using information scraped from LinkedIn or your leaked data, and ask for a password reset or MFA re-enrollment. If your help desk doesn't have rigorous identity verification protocols, the attacker is in. And this is exactly how groups like Scattered Spider have breached some of the biggest brands in the world, from casinos to airlines to retailers. These are organizations with multi-billion pounds worth of revenue, and something as simple as a phone call has led to hundreds of millions of losses, probably billions now if we combine them. What really makes this dangerous is how low tech and repeatable it is. You don't need a vulnerability scanner. You don't even need a convincing voice anymore. There's tooling that can enable you to do that. All you need really is a phone number and a bit of open source intelligence. So the key takeaway in all of this then is defending against modern phishing means looking far beyond just those email gateways. We've got to secure help desk procedures. Recently, I spoke to an organization and asked a simple question: how many people have the authorization to reset user passwords? And we were told it should be around about half a dozen people who were doing that type of activity in anger. So we had a look with them and looked how many identities had been used to reset credentials in the past 30 days. And it was something like 20 plus users had reset somebody's password. Your help desk, your IT team are genuinely your front line now. And so another thing, as well as visibility, so the second takeaway from today, something really actionable: get in touch with your help desk managers and put robust measures around help desk procedures. It will really make a difference now, and something you can do quite quickly. It's one of those areas, common sense is the most helpful. Put reasonable things in place and it will have the biggest impact, but also make sure it's sustainable, because the reason help desks get targeted, aside from the position they hold, it's often they're very fatigued and they're dealing with dozens, if not hundreds, of tickets per day. And it's an easy target. We need to think about this a little bit more. So beyond securing those procedures, we have to monitor authentication patterns, and we have to block session token theft. And also, in addition to that, we've got to assume attackers are already trying to bypass every control you've deployed. Your help desk and IT users now need to be trained like frontline responders, because increasingly that's exactly what they are. Clearly then, traditional detection is no longer enough. I've briefly outlined there that the phishing landscape has changed. Many of these attacks now feel like 0 days, because each phish is using a unique, never before seen domain that isn't appearing on threat intelligence lists that most security products are using. Payloads are hosted on legitimate services. We've seen it all: Dropbox, DocuSign, Adobe, things that your organization will be using in anger for normal business as usual things that are not easy to block and kind of affect the attack surface as a result. And also things like malicious pages only appearing after user interaction to prevent automated security tooling for detecting these things. These tricks and tricks like this, because I'm only kind of really touching the surface level for the benefit of time here, but these tricks are evading traditional detections. Those URL block lists, email filters, and sandboxing, and so on, are struggling to keep up. So to stay ahead, mature teams are shifting to more behavioral detection. What the user process does, not just static indicators, monitoring browser activity and session tokens and things like that, and flagging suspicious credential input in real time. And also, as I'm sure you can tell, if attackers are leveraging, things that you're releasing to the world, whether it's inadvertently or otherwise, sharing these things on the dark web, things like attack surface monitoring, continuous attack surface monitoring is absolutely essential now. We have to move beyond reacting to yesterday's threats and instead need to observe malicious behaviors as they happen and stop them early. So with that in mind, we have to redesign recovery. We've seen that recovery, not prevention, is where reputations are made or lost. If your business critical systems go offline today, ask yourself, how quickly can you return to normal? Do your teams know what to prioritize? And can you operate without digital tools for hours or days? If you can't answer those questions right now, you need to start working towards that point fairly soon, because in the midst of a serious incident, navigating these things is impossible almost. It has to be done in peacetime, and we're long beyond the situation where the simple case of we're a bunch of dedicated professionals, our leadership team is like a family, we're used to adversity, we'll pull together and we'll find a solution. I'm sorry, but that mindset no longer holds mustard. You have to be prepared now. There's no other option. So resilient organizations are redesigning recovery from the ground up. And this includes things like testing the integrity of backups regularly. If I had a penny for every incident I've been involved in where backups were there, but they were completely corrupted, not by the attacker, but because they weren't being taken properly, and therefore absolutely, put the organization in a bad place, I would be an incredibly rich man. So the integrity of those backups that you're taking are essential. There's also a question mark here. I think this has been true for many, many years now, but it's an issue that keeps cropping up. We need to think about this a little bit more, but that's perhaps a topic for another day. Beyond backups, we've got to ensure that our recovery time objectives align with the real business needs. So what that means is you can't just hand your business continuity planning to your IT team and expect them to build it. It needs to engage at the business level with the operators, with the people who are doing their day jobs, because I can guarantee no matter how good your processes are, no matter how good your documentation is, a lot of your business is existing in the heads of your employees. And if you're just assuming that your IT team are going to understand all of that and be able to build a beautiful continuity plan that will save you at a moment's notice, you're very much mistaken. The engagement has to happen at all levels of the organization in a targeted way, but it does take time and effort to do it well. With that in mind, we have to also practice those fallback operations, even if they're manual. Again, I'll repeat myself again. Common sense, simple, is often beautiful in this kind of situation, and the most effective way of handling these things. In addition to this, we have to build processes and mechanisms for total loss, not just partial disruption. Recovery then is more than technical, it's cross-functional, it involves legal, comms, operations, finance. Everyone has a role now, and the faster you recover, the lesser power an attacker has. A well-rehearsed recovery plan can simply turn a catastrophic incident into a controlled disruption, and that is a powerful business differentiator in the modern world. In addition to this, another thing that we're finding is segmentation and isolation are really important. It is one of the most effective ways to reduce the impact of an intrusion is to contain it early. But what we see still today, many environments still operate on flat networks with shared administrative access and no isolation between business units. And that's true for on-premise as it is for cloud and hybrid infrastructures. as well. Often cloud infrastructures mirror the mistakes of the past with how the on-prem network has result, even if it has been set up recently. These kind of things are absolute gifts to attackers, because once they're inside, they can easily escalate privileges, move laterally, and exfiltrate and encrypt data at scale. So it is now critical that modern architectures prioritize segmentation of both networks and identities. So that means separating critical systems from routine ones, applying things like the principle of least privileges and time-bound access to admin roles. Again, a serious issue we keep coming up against is IT administrators, using high privileged administration accounts, often the most high privileged accounts in the environment, for routine admin tasks. What that's doing is seeding the environment with high privileged credentials that can be stolen. Also, IT admins and sysadmins doing high privileged admin work from the same host where they're receiving their emails and doing their web browsing. You're basically asking for an accident to happen in that mode, because if an attacker phishes a sysadmin, it's and you've got a flat network, and the high privileged credentials have been seeded everywhere, it's game over pretty quickly. And attackers now will go straight to the jugular. When these human operated ransomware attacks really started kicking in around sort of 2018, early 2019, dwell times were about 30 days on average. And that gave defenders an opportunity to respond and contain the threat before the worst happened. These days, it can be hours, even minutes, from compromise to impact. So we have to really think about this and build measures in place. With that, we've got to ensure that compromise of one area doesn't cascade into full control. Hence why segmentation and isolation are key. And when dwell times are so low, we need to build rapid isolation capabilities. The ability to quickly quarantine compromised endpoints, user accounts, or even cloud environments without resorting to full shutdown. And containment is often the difference between a security event and a business crisis. Segmentation buys you time, isolation stops the bleed. We've also got to modernize the core. So resilience depends heavily on the strength and agility of your core systems. Legacy infrastructure often lacks visibility, logging or patching support. During a breach, these become choke points, things that are hard to investigate, harder to rebuild. Recent incidents that we've been involved in have shown that recovery is significantly slowed when core platforms are too old to be rapidly restored or migrated. And in some cases, business had to rebuild legacy applications from scratch, which led to weeks and weeks of downtime. So this is why more forward-looking organizations are doing things like identifying legacy systems critical to operations, prioritizing upgrades or replacements, so the short comms but there, hopefully you can still hear me. So just to recap, this is why forward-looking organizations are identifying legacy systems critical to operations, prioritizing upgrades or replacements, and wrapping remaining legacy systems in compensating controls, logging, segmentation, and restricted access. Building pathways to recover or replace them quickly in a crisis is essential. And that legacy debt that you have is a business risk, not just a technical issue. So True resilience means investing in core systems that can withstand disruption and recover fast. We also have to train like we fight. So, this means threat-informed defense. Resilient organizations aren't just simulating attacks, they are rehearsing them. They're running adversary simulation based on real TTPs from attackers likely to target their sector. And they test how their teams are responding under pressure and where the gaps are, not just technically, but across people and process as well. We're asking questions like, are your controls tuned to detect common attack behaviors? Does your SOC know what's critical and what's noise? Can your business operate if a key system fails? Threat-informed defense isn't just a red team exercise. It's about embedding real-world threat intelligence into your planning. It's using things like purple teaming, bringing attack and defense together to map and improve detection coverage. And it's about bringing that telemetry together, correlating it into contextual risk-based triage. It's how mature teams are turning intelligence into action in the modern threat landscape. And another side note here on AI, very briefly, because let's be honest, the conversation around AI has moved far beyond productivity tools and security co-pilots, where we now have respected research labs and global coalitions warning that artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which could be years or decades away depending on who you believe, at the most extreme could lead to the extinction of the human race. So and that's not just a fringe opinion anymore. It's in open letters signed by industry leaders. Formal government briefings have also echoed the same concern, where misaligned AGI systems could deceive, outsmart, and ultimately disempower humanity. And if that risk does materialize, it may be governed or mishandled by a handful of people inside a handful of companies, which is quite a chilling concentration of power, especially when you consider how opaque and unregulated these large model developments are. Security risk, ethical questions, and power asymmetries are all converging in a way we've never dealt with before. But that's all well and good and concerning, of course, but we don't need to wait for artificial general intelligence to feel the impact. Attackers are already using today's LLMs to scale faster and strike smarter. Phishing emails are now easy to create and can be indistinguishable from legitimate messages. Chatbots are being weaponized for real-time social engineering. Things like credential stuffing attacks have been automated across thousands of targets simultaneously. And I've already mentioned things like deepfake voices and synthetic identities, which are appearing in things like phone-based scams. This means that the skill barrier for attackers has dropped, and in areas their effectiveness has increased. Of course, then on the other side, defenders are responding by doing things like trying to embed AI into their own workflows. I'm not talking here about arbitrary products just slapping AI badges on things. This is where these kind of tools are being leveraged in a positive sense to summarize dense logs and alerts in a matter of seconds, helping to flag behavioral anomalies through machine learning based risk scoring, and using sort of AI-based co-pilots to help with triage and suggesting smart remediation, or even explain things like detection logic in an easy way. It is helping to, in some ways, often small ways, security teams to work a bit faster and focus attention in the right way. But let's be really clear here. AI, whether it's today's AI or future AI, like everything, is not a silver bullet. I encourage everyone to avoid believing the hype. AI can hallucinate, it can be evaded, it can even be poisoned with false data by a patient adversary. So the strongest security teams know this, and they're doing things like designing AI-assisted workflows where human context, oversights, and ethics may stay firmly in the loop. But AI becomes a tool, not a decision maker. Because in cybersecurity, as in broader AI discussion, the question isn't can AI do this, it's should it, and what happens if it's wrong. And that topic is as relevant to resilience as it is to anything else. Beyond AI then, and there's a final key point here, third-party risk is a clear own goal that many organizations are facing. Attackers do not care whether it's your own supplier they breach first, only that it leads to the data or access they want. We've seen breaches begin through outsourced IT providers, billing providers, or external service desks, third parties that often have privileged access but weaker controls. So resilient organizations are taking a structured approach. They're doing things like mapping all vendors with access to systems or data. They're setting minimum security requirements contractually. But not only that, they're then implementing technical controls like segmentation, strong authentication with conditional access, and then actively monitoring that, as well as doing things like monitoring for vendor compromise through threat intelligence work and other things as well. But also preparing contingency plans in case a key supplier goes offline, because you can't rely on your third parties being available even if you are down as well. So the goal here isn't zero third-party risk, because that's simply unrealistic. It's knowing where the risks lie, reducing that exposure, and being ready to act quickly if they become active threats. Your resilience is only as strong as the weakest link in your supply chain. Okay, to summarize then, what I've tried to do today is give you 8 priorities that you need to be thinking around, with some additional information to give you some justification for why I'm positioning these. Security should not slow down the business, it should support it. Resilient organizations can absorb shocks, maintain customer trust, and recover faster than competitors. So the 8 principles, the 8 priorities that we've seen mature organizations take to improve resilience, just to recap, is 1, got to assume compromise, design for detection and continuity. 2 is prioritize visibility, because you can't defend what you can't see. 3 is we've got to move beyond traditional detection. We need to observe malicious behaviors as they happen and stop them early. 4, we need to redesign recovery and rehearse those total failure scenarios. 5, we need to segment and isolate so we can contain breaches before they spread. 6, we've got to modernize the core, because legacy systems are your fragile underbelly when you're under pressure. We also have to 7, train like you fight, with robust adversary simulation. And 8, and last by no means least, we've got to clarify that third-party risk. We've got to treat supplier access as part of your perimeter, and a core part of what you're doing to underpin your resilience. Because resilience today is not just about surviving, it's about thriving under pressure. And that's simply what modern security leadership looks like today. I want to thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully, many of you have found this useful. And as I mentioned at the top, 40 odd minutes is punchy to cover a topic as dense as resilience. So there's more to say, a lot more to say on this, and we will be doing that. But I really encourage you to get in touch. Me and my team were happy to help. And there's some details on the screen there where you can get hold of us. If you want to talk about resilience, we're here to help. Give us a call. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening to me, and hopefully we'll speak again soon. Thank you all.